My name is Valerie Reed, and I was 44 years old when a stranger thanked me for lending him my SUV. The problem was, I'd never seen him before in my life. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona. I had just finished a long shift at the dental clinic where I worked as a hygienist. The day had been exhausting. 3 emergency patients, 2 canceled appointments, 1 broken x-ray machine. All I wanted was gas, a cold drink, and my couch. I pulled into a gas station about 10 minutes from home. The temperature was 104 degrees. Typical Arizona summer. I was standing beside my silver Toyota Highlander, waiting for the tank to fill when a pickup truck pulled into the pump across from me. A man climbed out, maybe late 30s, baseball cap, work boots, friendly smile. He looked directly at me, then waved. I smiled politely, the way people do when they're not entirely sure if they know someone. The man walked over. "Hey, Valerie?" I blinked, immediately confused, because he clearly knew my name, and I had absolutely no idea who he was. "Hi." The smile on his face widened. "Thanks again for letting me borrow the SUV last month." My stomach tightened. "What?" For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "Sorry?" The man laughed. "Your husband said it was fine." I stared at him, every instinct in my body suddenly awake. "My husband?" "Yeah," he pointed toward my SUV. "Great vehicle, by the way." The smile remained on his face. Mine disappeared, completely, because there was only one problem. Nobody had borrowed my SUV, at least not that I knew of. The man must have noticed something in my expression. His smile faded. "Oh." The confidence vanished immediately. "You didn't know." Not a question, a realization. Neither of us spoke. For several seconds, we just stood there. The gas pump clicked. The sound felt strangely loud. Finally, the man rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought Trevor told you." Trevor, my husband. Married 20 years. Shared bank account, shared house, shared life. Apparently not shared information. I forced a small smile. "It's okay." It wasn't okay. Not even a little. The man looked uncomfortable now. The kind of uncomfortable people get when they accidentally walk into someone else's family problem. "I only had it for a weekend." "A weekend?" I nodded, trying to remain calm, trying not to overreact, trying not to imagine every possible explanation. The conversation ended awkwardly. He returned to his truck. I finished pumping gas, and then sat in my SUV for nearly 10 minutes, not driving, just thinking, because maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe Trevor borrowed it himself. Maybe he'd forgotten to mention it. Maybe I was misunderstanding everything. Maybe. But the strange feeling stayed. That night, Trevor was watching baseball when I got home. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter, then casually asked, "Who is Daniel Foster?" Trevor's eyes immediately left the television, only for a second, but I saw it, the hesitation, the recognition, the knowledge. He knew exactly who Daniel Foster was, and suddenly, I knew exactly what kind of conversation we were about to have. Trevor looked away from the television. That was answer enough. Because people don't react like that when they don't know someone. They react like that when they've been hoping a topic never comes up. I folded my arms. "Who is Daniel Foster?" Trevor muted the television. Never a good sign. Then he sighed. "He's a friend." "A friend?" I nodded slowly. "The friend who borrowed my SUV?" The silence lasted 3 seconds too long. Then came the answer. "Yeah." My stomach dropped. Not because he'd confirmed it, because he'd confirmed it so casually, like we were discussing lawn chairs, not my vehicle, not something worth nearly $50,000. My vehicle. I sat down across from him. "When exactly were you planning to tell me?" Trevor rubbed his forehead. "I forgot." Forgot. The word instantly irritated me. People forget where they parked. People forget to buy milk. People do not forget that someone borrowed their spouse's SUV for an entire weekend, at least not if they think it's important. I stared at him. How long have you known Daniel? Years. How long has he been borrowing my SUV? The room became very quiet. Trevor looked down. That told me everything, because if the answer were one time, he would have said one time, immediately. Instead, he hesitated. Finally, he admitted, more than once. I blinked. What? He sighed. Not a lot. My heart sank, because not a lot isn't a number. It's a warning that the actual number is bad. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, my Highlander sat in the driveway, exactly where I left it, exactly where I thought it had always been. Suddenly, I wasn't so sure. I turned back around. How many times? Trevor stared at the floor, then quietly said, maybe 4. Maybe 4. Maybe 4. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. 4 times, 4 separate occasions, and somehow I was hearing about it from a stranger at a gas station, not from my husband. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made, because Daniel wasn't family. He wasn't even a close friend. He was simply someone Trevor knew. Around lunchtime, I decided to clean out my SUV, something I hadn't done in months, mostly because I needed a distraction. I started with the center console, receipts, pens, old sunglasses, nothing unusual. Then I opened the glove compartment and immediately froze, because inside was a toll receipt from California. I stared at it. California. My SUV had been in California. The problem? I hadn't. Not recently. Not ever in the last year. I pulled out another receipt, then another. Parking garage. Fast food, gas station, different dates, different locations, different cities. My stomach tightened, because none of these trips belonged to me. I sat in the driver's seat and spread the receipts across my lap, trying to make sense of them, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. Then I found something worse. A parking ticket, issued 8 months earlier, not in Arizona, not in California, Nevada, Las Vegas. I stared at the ticket, completely stunned, because somebody had taken my vehicle across state lines, and nobody had bothered to tell me. That evening, I placed the receipts and the ticket on the kitchen table, right in front of Trevor. He looked at them, then looked at me, then looked away, again. My voice stayed calm, much calmer than I felt. Who took my SUV to Nevada? Trevor didn't answer, not immediately, and suddenly, I had a feeling Daniel Foster wasn't the only person who had been borrowing my vehicle. Trevor stared at the parking ticket. For several seconds, he said nothing, and that silence told me everything, because innocent people usually answer questions. Guilty people calculate answers. Finally, he sighed, a long, exhausted sigh, then quietly admitted, "My cousin Eric borrowed it." I blinked. Cousin Eric? Trevor nodded. The Vegas trip. I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Not only had someone borrowed my SUV without permission, multiple people had borrowed it. Family members, friends, apparently anyone who asked Trevor. The realization made my stomach turn, because this wasn't one bad decision. This was a system I knew absolutely nothing about. I sat down, slowly, carefully, the way people sit when they're afraid of what they'll hear next. Who else? Trevor immediately looked uncomfortable. That answer alone scared me, because if there was nobody else, he would have said so. Instead, he rubbed his forehead, then finally admitted, "Daniel?" I nodded, already knew that. Eric knew that too. Then came another name, Mark. I frowned. Who's Mark? My brother-in-law. Another person, another unauthorized driver, another stranger using my SUV. I felt my pulse quicken, not because of the vehicle, because of the disrespect. Nobody had asked me. Nobody. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't tried. They simply assumed Trevor could say yes on my behalf, as if my opinion didn't matter. The next morning, I called my insurance company, not because I planned to file a claim, because I needed information. The representative was polite, professional, helpful. I explained the situation carefully, without mentioning names, without mentioning family drama, just facts. When she finished explaining the policy, my stomach dropped, hard, because several of the people who had borrowed my SUV weren't listed drivers, which meant if something serious had happened, an accident, an injury, a lawsuit, the situation could have become very complicated, very expensive, very quickly. I thanked her and hung up, then sat at my desk in complete silence. For 20 years, Trevor and I had built a stable life, a responsible life, and somehow he'd been risking all of it for convenience. That evening, I decided to stop guessing. I wanted facts, real facts. So after dinner, I opened the navigation history in the SUV's system, a feature I'd never bothered looking at before. The screen loaded, then displayed dozens of saved destinations. Some were mine, the dental office, the grocery store, my gym. Then I saw locations I didn't recognize, construction sites, apartment complexes, hotels, addresses in cities I'd never visited. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, because every unfamiliar address represented a trip I hadn't taken, a trip someone else had taken in my vehicle, without my permission. I kept scrolling. Then I found something that made me freeze, a saved destination labeled family use. Family use. Not Trevor's house, not Eric's apartment, not Daniel's address. Family use. As if my SUV had become shared property, as if ownership had somehow become optional. That night, I showed Trevor the screen. He looked at it, then immediately looked away. Again, I pointed at the label, family use. The room became silent because there was no explanation for that. None. Finally, Trevor admitted something I'd been slowly realizing myself. Mom started calling it that. His mother, Linda Reed, of course, the woman who organized every family event, the woman who believed every family resource belonged to everyone, the woman who had apparently decided my SUV was community property. I stared at Trevor, completely stunned, because suddenly this wasn't about borrowing a car anymore. It was about something much bigger, and judging by the look on Trevor's face, he knew exactly what was coming next. I didn't wait. The next morning I called a family meeting. Not a dramatic one, not a screaming match, just a conversation. At least that was my plan. Sunday afternoon arrived. Trevor's mother, Linda, came first, then Eric, then Mark. A few other relatives followed. By 3 o'clock, there were 8 people sitting in my living room, drinking coffee, making small talk, acting like everything was normal. I sat quietly and let them settle in. Then I placed 3 things on the coffee table: the California toll receipt, the Nevada parking ticket, and a printed list of navigation destinations from my SUV. The room immediately became quiet. Linda looked at the papers, then looked at me. "What is this?" I folded my hands. "My vehicle." Nobody spoke. I continued. "For over a year, multiple people have been borrowing my SUV without asking me." More silence. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that appears when everyone realizes the truth has finally arrived. Eric shifted in his seat. Mark stared at the floor. Linda forced a smile. "Well, we're family." There it was. The sentence. The sentence that explained everything. Not permission, not respect, family, as if the word itself erased boundaries. I looked directly at her. Being family doesn't make my car public property. The room became silent again. This time, nobody argued, because nobody could. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had already burned itself out. What remained was clarity. I picked up the Nevada parking ticket. Who was going to pay this? Nobody answered. I held up the toll receipts. Who paid for these? Still nothing. Then I pointed toward the driveway. And who would have handled the insurance nightmare if someone crashed my SUV? The silence became enormous, because for the first time, they weren't thinking about borrowing a vehicle. They were thinking about consequences, real consequences. Linda slowly sat back. For once, she didn't have an answer. Finally, she sighed, a genuine sigh. Not annoyed, not defensive, tired. I guess we got too comfortable. The room stayed quiet, because everyone knew she was right. Comfort had become entitlement. Entitlement had become expectation, and expectation had become habit. The following day, I did 3 things. First, I removed every extra key. Second, I updated the vehicle security settings. Third, I made one very simple rule. Nobody drives my SUV without asking me directly. Not Trevor, not family, not friends, not anyone. The rule wasn't complicated, it was normal. The surprising part was that it had never existed before. A week later, Eric showed up at my house, alone. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check. It covered every toll charge, every parking fee, every expense connected to his trips. A few days later, Mark did the same. Then Daniel, one by one. No arguments, no excuses, just accountability. And honestly, that mattered more than the money. 3 months later, something happened that made me smile. Linda called. Her voice sounded unusually careful. Valerie? Yes? A pause. Then she asked, would it be okay if Eric borrowed your SUV for one afternoon? I nearly laughed. Not because the question was ridiculous, because it was the first time anyone had actually asked. I smiled. No. Linda laughed. I laughed too, and that was the end of it. No guilt, no pressure, no arguments, just respect. The funny thing is, the biggest victory wasn't getting control of my SUV back. It was discovering that boundaries don't damage healthy relationships. They improve them. Because the people who truly respect you don't get angry when you set limits. They simply learn where the limits are. 6 months later, I was driving home from work when I stopped at the same gas station where this entire story began. Same pump, same parking lot, same Arizona heat. As I filled the tank, I looked at my SUV and smiled, not because it was a vehicle, because it was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, everyone else understood that too. If you've ever had someone treat your belongings like community property, leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more realistic family drama stories. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.